This podcast contains explicit content and discussions related to real-life criminal activities, including violence and sensitive topics. Listener discretion is advised. The host's opinions are personal and are not representative of any individuals or organizations involved in the cases. We strive for accuracy, but if you've missed anything, please let us know. Thank you for listening. Welcome to Rotten Minds. I'm Kay. A mother walked into her son's room deciding to clean up the room for him. As she was going through the clutter one by one, she found a garbage bag hidden within the closet. Curious as to what her son would have inside the bag, she opened it and peered inside. It was then she found something that she would never forget. Within the bag was a human head. In today's case, we're going to be talking about Terri Cohee Jr. This case is so bizarre and also scary that a teenager was capable of this bloody murder. The ironic thing is that he thought he could get away with it because, according to him, he had on purpose killed someone he thought no one would miss. Today's case is going to be a long and crazy one, so stay tuned till the end. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different because it's just going to be me. We had something come up. Also, since you're already here, please follow us on Spotify or wherever you're listening to, and also support us by rating our show. Before we get into the case, here is a disclaimer. This episode includes discussions of sensitive topics such as violence and murder, so please listen with caution. On February 28, 2021, around 2 a.m., a 911 call was made. The call was very strange. The caller said that a car had been sinking into the Colorado River at the Blue Heron boat ramp. As the authorities arrive at the scene, they meet Terri Cohee, her husband Brian Sr., and son Brian Jr. It was their son's car that was now sinking deeply into the river. The police talked to Brian Jr. trying to get a grasp on what had actually happened. And as they talk to Brian, they understand that he had parked the car just a little down the hill and had gotten out to get a breath of fresh air and to think. As he walked away from the car, he didn't notice the car slowly sliding down the hill. And then he got back into the car and tried to drive the car up, but by then it was too late and the car had already begun sinking into the river. Left with no choice other than to call for help, he decided to call his parents, who then called the police. Though they had called the towing company, no one was willing to go into the frigid waters of the Colorado River, especially at 2 in the morning. As the authorities talk more with the parents, they find out that Brian Sr. is the owner of the life jacket program at Blue Heron's boat ramp. He said that he had never seen something like this happen before, to which one of the officers admitted that it was his first time seeing this as well. The situation was so bizarre that both the parents and the authorities couldn't help but laugh. As they wait for the tow truck to arrive, Terri asked the officers if her son could go home to change out of his wet clothes. The authorities, convinced that this whole incident was just a teenager's stupid mistake, they agreed. The Cohees went home and then, after a little while, returned back to the scene, and this time without Brian Jr. By then, a towing truck had arrived and was trying to get the car out of the water. It was then that the authorities noticed, just below the license plate, a red substance which looked a lot like blood was dripping down. Thinking that the boy could have been injured and probably did not notice because of the adrenaline rush, the police expressed their concerns to the parents who were waiting in their car. Terri then makes a call and asks her son if he was injured, to which he replied no. He said that if it were blood, he wouldn't know where it came from. Although suspicious of the red substance, the authorities decided to release the car back into the custody of the Cohees. What they didn't know at the time was that just 24 hours later, a horrifying discovery would be made. The next day, March 1st, 2021, police arrived back at the boat ramp, this time at the request of a woman who had reported that a homeless man by the name of Warren Barnes had gone missing. The caller, Monique Lenotti, told the police about the bridal shop she owned and how she used to give the man a chair to sit on and to read his books. The pair had gotten close over the last 4 years. She had met with him on Saturday, but then agreed to meet the next day, but he never ended up showing up. When people ready, the place Barnes had worked at, called and asked why he hadn't shown up to work, she told them that she hadn't seen him since Saturday. Now, if you don't know what People Ready is, it is a labor supply company. They specialize in quick and reliable on-demand labor and highly skilled workers. People Ready serves businesses by supplying labor and providing people opportunities for work. Monique said that Warren would never miss work. He had never once not shown up for work in the last 4 years he worked there, and that was when she knew that something was really wrong. The reason as to why she got the call was because someone had found Warren's wallet near the boat ramp and had called People Ready, who then called her and said that he hadn't shown up for work. According to Monique, there was no reason for Warren to ever be in that location, and she knew for a fact that he would never come down there. When inquired by the police if she knew who had found the wallet, she said that it was the person who ran the life jacket program at the boat ramp. And if you've been paying attention, you would know who that is. And that is none other than Terri Cohee Sr. It was not only Monique who had grown concerned over the disappearance of Warren, other locals were worried too. They described Warren as although rough looking, he was the nicest fellow around. They also gave the authorities a photo of Warren in hopes that it would aid their search. The police questioned Brian Sr. about the wallet. It was at that time he said that he found the wallet originally at the most unusual place, which was inside the car that his son had accidentally sunk into the river. Terri, being suspicious of her son, decides to search his room. She had no idea that what she would find there would haunt her forever. As she walked into the room, she opened the closet door and in there she found a garbage bag. She took the bag in her hands, which she later described as being heavy. She decided to take the bag to the kitchen sink and then she slowly opened it. She noticed the bag had been double bagged. As she opened it, she saw maggots and what looked like a human ear. Horrified, she jumped back. She called her husband, who had gone to pick up their younger son from school, and asked him to come home immediately. Next, she phones the police and they arrive at the Cohee's residence with their sirens off so as to not frighten the suspect. As they walk up to the house, they see Brian Jr. outside the house standing near his car. The deputy strikes up a casual greeting with him so as to not alert him about anything. The deputy then asked Brian Jr. about the things his mother had found in his room and asked him what he thought his mother had found. And then Brian, in the most bone-chilling manner, with his head tilted to one side, said, "A human head and hands." It was so horrifying the way he said that, and by his body language it almost seemed like he was bragging about it. The officer then asked him if he had any weapons on him, to which he replied no. Brian is then taken to the police car, while the deputy heads over to the Cohee's house to verify the evidence. The shock the mother must have felt when she found the head is just unimaginable. The deputy then goes into the house, opens the bag, confirming the evidence, and he walks out. Meanwhile, as Brian Jr. sits in the car, he makes strange remarks to the police officer, to which she doesn't respond. He was then driven to the police station and then led to the interrogation room. The police also took in both the parents for questioning to figure out what had gone down that morning. Terri cries as she describes the incident to the detective and about how the car, after being sunk into the river, had stopped working because the battery had been damaged, and that Brian Sr. was trying to salvage it to see if he could get it working again. It was then he found Warren's wallet inside their son's car. Brian Sr. then tells the detectives that as he further searched the car, he had found a knife in the glove box. Now the father, although alarmed, decided to give his son the benefit of the doubt. He opens the wallet and sees a social security card and calls up Bond's place of work, People Ready. As soon as he found that Bonds was missing, he called Brian Jr. and asked him what the wallet was doing inside his car. All through this time, both the parents knew something was seriously wrong, but they still didn't want to suspect their son of doing something horrible and unimaginable. Brian Jr. told his dad that he had just found the wallet at the boat ramp when he was walking around. And when he was asked why he hadn't informed his parents of the wallet, he said that a lot had happened in the past 2 days, and in the excitement, he just had forgotten about it. Overall, whatever he said seemed believable, and the family, though deeply suspicious of their own son, decided to put the strange accident behind them, and they were completely unprepared for the spine-chilling discovery that would be made just the next day. The next morning was when Terri found the plastic trash bag with the head inside. She cries as she tells the detectives about how she opened the bag and found the severed head in it. She also said that there was a secondary bag in the closet, which probably had the hands in it. They then made up a story to get Brian back to the house. They called him up and told him to bring his younger brother Andy's car back home for a driving lesson because Andy was trying to get his driver's license. Brian Sr. tells the detectives about the strange remark that Brian had made when he arrived back at the house. "Dad, do you ever feel like the day's going to change?" This kind of gives you an idea that he knew something was up. While the detective talks with the parents, Brian Jr. is being questioned by two other detectives. Throughout the questioning, Brian seems to be very friendly with the investigators and goes about laughing and cracking jokes. The detectives engage in casual conversation with him, and this is basically to see if he's able to answer basic questions, so that in court it is proven that he's capable of fulfilling the responsibilities given to him. The investigator then asks how Brian had arrived at the sheriff's office, to which he replies, with a tilted head and a nonchalant response, "I murdered someone." He laughs as he talks about how he'd probably get 15 or 20 years in jail, so he decided that it was useless to try and deny what he had done. After all, he did not want to fight the long arm of the law. He was fully cooperative and was willing to talk about what he had done. He says that on February 27th, he was feeling quite depressed and decided to go for a drive. He said that on February 27th, he was feeling quite depressed and decided to go for a drive. He then asked the detectives a very peculiar question. "You have sent people who committed crimes like me to jail, so do we stay in the county jail or are we moved?" It was clear from what he asked that although trying to remain cool and nonchalant about what he had done, he wanted to know what would happen after the interview was over. It was also interesting to note how he compared himself to others with the phrase, "people who have committed crimes like me," almost as if he had joined an exclusive club or a gang or something. As the detectives get back to the questioning, Brian then takes up a marker and draws a map of the place he drove to. And as he was driving by, he said he noticed a large thing covered by a canvas. He then realizes that what he was looking at was a homeless person, and so he decided to go to his car, slip on a pair of gloves, and grabs a knife, and goes over to the sleeping man and repeatedly stabs him in the neck. Brian Jr. then decides to get on the floor in front of the detectives and does a demonstration of how he was stabbing him and was reliving his morbid actions. I watched the body cam footage of this case as well as the interrogation footages, and this is just, if you see his body language within the interrogation room itself, he's just enjoying it, he's reliving it, and his demonstration showed him enjoying the process. He was smiling, he was excited, he did not bother to spare any details. He threw all the defenses that could have possibly been raised for him out of the window. He tells the detectives about how he expected the man to be struggling, and it was surprisingly easy, and how he didn't even break a sweat. He also said that during the time he was stabbing the man, he was growling and making animalistic noises to seem more scarier. He then proceeded to show the detectives how he growled. Let me be honest with you. That was just disgusting to watch. The fact that a teenager, a human being, let's say, was capable of such horrible, horrendous acts and act like nothing fazed him it was just a lot to digest. He's just excited. He's so excited about what he did. And it is also quite evident that he was waiting for his right opportunity, because who would have a pair of gloves inside their car and a knife ready to go at any time? He seems to literally be bouncing in his seat and also smiles as he's talking about the murder and what he did. Also, when he first enters the interrogation room and sits down, his leg is nervously moving up and down, like the shaky earthquake thingy that most of us do, which is definitely a sign of nervousness. He remarked that it is something that he already has. It's not because he's nervous. And keep in mind that Brian is said to have autism and ADHD. So in the interrogation footage, he did move very nervous. He did show signs of nervousness by shaking his legs or, drinking water. This could also be not because he's nervous, could be just because of his ADHD. Also, I don't think that anybody could argue that this wasn't premeditated just because he might have certain conditions, because he already had everything he needed with him in the car, the gloves, and that too 3 pairs, and also the knife. He tells him that as he finished stabbing the man, the poor man took his last breath. He describes this in such an inhumane manner and showed absolutely no remorse for what he had done. After he finished stabbing the man, Brian said that he just kept on saying, "Stinky, dirty, dirty, stinky, stinky." The eerie coincidence is that on one of his social media accounts, he refers to himself as "that stinky boy." When the detective asked him if he had worried about someone seeing him, he replied that it had been 11 p.m. and not many people were driving by, and that even if people saw, they wouldn't see the man, but would just see him holding a 12-inch knife, wearing gloves, and a mask to conceal his identity. While watching the interrogation footage, the most disturbing thing that he says all these things with a smile on his face. He then proceeds to go into such extreme detail about how he cut up the body, and while telling this, he adds morbid, dark humor jokes and laughs about it. From this, and also from the accounts of his mother and his friends, that morbid humor has long been one of Brian's trademarks. The level of detail he used to describe what he did with the body post-mortem is disturbing. He also talks about the steps he took to avoid getting caught. All of these would have been important elements for the prosecution as it goes to establishing his state of mind. He put the clothes that he wore during the murder into the washing machine and washed it twice. He left no room for doubt. He talked about the murder weapon. He talked about concealing his crime by trying to destroy evidence. It was also clear that this was pretty much premeditated. He left the body at the bridge and took the head with him, and proceeded to throw out the hands that he had cut around the area near the bridge. His words seemed to get more bizarre, and in addition to reliving the mutilation, he also enthusiastically goes over the dimensions and the location of the crime scene, almost as if he was a police officer himself. When the officers searched the area where he had disposed of the arms, they found a scene that would disturb them for the rest of their lives. There were arms and parts of the body scattered around the area. As the officers searched the area, the detectives in the interrogation room continued to question Brian Jr. about the whereabouts of the rest of the remains. A female detective questions Brian as to where he put the severed head and hands, to which he brings up 3 written rules that he had formed for himself. It describes how within 3 hours rigor mortis sets in. 3 days, the body starts to stink. 3 weeks, the body starts to decompose. 3 months, the body is unrecognizable. 3 years, the body is now bones. The detective questions how he knows such a thing, to which he replies that he had always had this fascination with forensics and anatomy. He asked if it was accurate, and the detective replies that it was sort of accurate, and he smiles, grabs the bottle of water, gratified from the investigator's acknowledgement. He then goes into detail about how he cut up the body, and I'm not gonna go into the detail because of how disgusting it is. I don't know, it was just very distressing for a person to do this to another human being. An old man who did not even go to any lengths to hurt anybody. Brian had previously mentioned to his family and his friends about his desire for killing, and multiple times searched up topics correlated with murder. He later tells about his psychological history when questioned by the detective. He tells the detective that he has high-functioning Asperger's, ADHD, major depressive disorder, and some sort of schizo disorder, which was stated by his doctor. This was done in order for the detectives to rule out the possibility of Brian claiming not guilty in court by the reason of insanity. He then says that the reason he chose Warren as his victim was because he felt that the police wouldn't care about high-risk individuals, which are usually homeless people and prostitutes and so on. He wanted to kill someone who had lived that type of lifestyle so that he wouldn't be caught. He told the detectives that the original plan was to leave the man behind after killing him, but as he was worried about the fibers of his clothes being on the victim, he deliberately messed up the clothes. This is an outstanding amount of premeditation for a youth offender. He is 19 years old, by the way. His brain is not even fully developed, but he's already thinking about 10 steps ahead of his actions and trying to cover his tracks so that he can possibly get away with this. This brings up the chilling fact that what would have happened if he hadn't been caught. According to one of his friends, this isn't the first time that he has talked about killing a victim on the outskirts of society. His internet search history adds an interesting element to this case. As evidenced by the search history, he had searched up how to cope with murderous thoughts and so on. He also told the detectives how he used to go out on night drives just looking for secluded places with homeless people in the nearby area so that he could act out his fantasies. He then proceeds to compare himself to Ed Kemper, who was an American serial killer who killed 6 young girls and parts of his family. Brian told that when he sees girls walking down the street, he has similar thoughts to Ed Kemper. When questioned if he had done anything like this in the past, he denied it. And when asked if he had practiced on animals, he talks about how he killed a stray cat by dragging it into a sleeping bag, beat it, strangled it, and broke its neck, and then decapitated the cat. He then describes putting the parts in different boxes. This shows that he had some sort of a fantasy with decapitation. The police questioned Brian's friends and teachers about his behavior, and they talked about his morbid sense of humor and his obsession with murder. The teachers reported on how violent he was, and they also found a book he had which contained brief descriptions of serial killers and some sort of cryptic language he had formed. Terri tells the detectives about the time when he knew a girl who had PTSD from an incident and was scared of loud noises. But he still went up to her and clapped really loud in her ear, which caused her to have a panic attack, and that he was reprimanded for that. Brian describes to the detectives the gruesome act he committed by cutting up the man's belly, slicing his leg multiple times, stabbing him repeatedly, while the man cried out asking why. And he was doing this with a smirk on his face. He then goes into gory details about what he saw when he cut up the man, which I'm not going to say because it's just too much for me. When asked the most important question as to why he murdered, he replied, "I've always wondered what murder felt like." When the police asked his teachers if they were surprised he did such an act, they replied that they weren't. A day before the murder, Brian pulled up different Wikipedia articles about notorious killers. Note that his mother used to run a daycare for kids, and the kids were inside the house on the day she found the bags. She immediately called the parents up and asked them to take the kids home due to a family emergency. When questioned about the victim, he was not at all interested in talking. He also talked about shooting up his school, and he said that it was because he didn't really like people. He was very obsessed with reading weird dark books like The Son of Sam and Columbine shootings. We've covered the Son of Sam case on our podcast earlier, so if you want to check that out, you can go listen to it. His high school journalism teacher said that Brian had a fascination with school shootings. In the interrogation room, Brian tells the detectives that this isn't the first time his family had found something unsettling in his room. Just last year, they had found a kit which he had been putting together, which consisted of hammers, shovels, knives, large zip ties, duct tape, saw, etc. He told the detectives that the kit had been for hurting people. Although he had tried convincing his parents that the kit had been made for other reasons, they gave him an option to either throw out the whole thing or they would call the police. If they had done so, then he would have been arrested on charges of conspiracy. He had put the kit together during the time he was actually fantasizing about killing people. Finally, he talks about the day he accidentally sunk his car. That night, Brian's road trip to the Blue Heron boat ramp had absolutely nothing to do with relaxation. He explained to the authorities that after killing Warren, he had returned home and tried to go to sleep. Which I just don't understand how. I don't know how you do that. Kill a person in cold blood and try to go to sleep. But he was unable to sleep because he was anxious that the authorities would lift a partial fingerprint off of the body because the gloves that he had been wearing at the time of the murder had a hole in it. So he decided to dispose of the body completely. Then he drove back to the place where he had murdered Warren, this time in a different outfit. He then picked up the body and put it in his trunk and then drove to the boat ramp. After reaching there, he backed his car down the hill believing that he could drive it up again, but he had seriously overestimated his abilities. He put the car in reverse and then opened the trunk and took the body out and put it in the water. And because he didn't want to get his fingerprints on the body, he moved it with his shoes. The utter disrespect. And after he was done, He got back into his car and tried to drive back up, but this proved to be unsuccessful as the car slowly slid down the hill and went into the water. Then his car started sinking rapidly with him inside it. He told the detectives that it was at this time he started panicking. He somehow managed to get out of the car and flag down a car coming down the road. The people in the car let him use their phone to contact his parents. He then explained to his parents that he had come down to the boat ramp for a breath of fresh air, but had made an honest mistake and that his car was now sinking. His parents believed him and made their way to the boat ramp. He mentions that when the police arrived, he didn't have to do a breathalyzer test because he hadn't been drinking. This is an important piece of evidence because he has now admitted that he was not intoxicated on the night of the murder, which then closes off a potential defense he could have used in court. He had forgotten to wipe the blood which was smeared on the reverse bumper, which is the red substance that the police had found earlier. He also said that the cops had not contacted him after they had released the car back into the Cohee's custody. From his body language in the interview, it is clear that he is enjoying talking about the sick details of the case. Later that day, he had messaged his friend about the car. He mentioned nothing about the body and just told her exactly what he had told his parents and the police. The people who let Brian use their phone were Derwood Pfeiffer and his grandson Kellen Pfeiffer. They said that Brian's behavior was rampant and that he was pacing around repeatedly saying that he was effed. With his attempts to dispose of the body and cover his tracks, Brian clearly showed that he knew what was right from wrong, which basically meant that he was in his right mind when he had committed the murder, which is even more crazy. After the disposal of the body, he searched up stuff related to it, which was evidence from his search history. He mentioned reading a lot of books about serial killers and that his classmates had also at one point called him Jeffrey Dahmer because of his morbid sense of humor and fascination with serial killers. Jeffrey Dahmer is another infamous American serial killer. He even had a book which contained the statistics of the kills of different serial killers. Throughout his school years, his friends and teachers described him as a problematic person. One of his friends even said that during parties and stuff, he used to dress up as serial killers. Seriously, this guy is truly evil with a rotten mind. At this point, Brian had provided the detectives with everything they could possibly want to know about the murder. He had detailed the killing not once, but twice, and also listed out how he disposed of the body in great detail. Now the question is, why did he do it? To which he replied, he had always wanted to know what murdering someone felt like. He said that in the books about serial killers that he had read, they had described this feeling of murder being awesome, so he wanted to experience that feeling for himself. As shocking as it is, in the end, Brian's motive comes down to a simple matter of him being curious. Even when he was confronted by the police at his house, he didn't bother trying to hide his curiosity. When the detectives asked if his curiosity was satisfied after the murder, he told them that the feeling was really intense and that his body shook out of excitement. He also told them that he didn't enjoy it and at the same time didn't hate it. At the end of the interrogation, Brian seems really satisfied with whatever he had told the police officers. He seemed to see himself in the same league as infamous killers such as Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, and so on. At the very end, he said to one of the detectives present in the room that he felt like Hannibal Lecter, who was an infamous cannibalistic serial killer. In January 2022, Brian Cohee Jr. pled not guilty by reason of insanity. This is just crazy to me. He was absolutely not insane, and this is often a reason used by most to try and wiggle their way out of the right course of justice. This plea then triggered a psych evaluation, and when the doctors asked him how he felt about the murder, he said, "Yeah, it's just kind of a thing that happened. It sucks, but it happened." Wow. The audacity this guy has is just shocking. He did not express any remorse for the victim till the end. He was charged with 1 count of evidence tampering, 2 counts of tampering with a deceased body, and 1 count of first-degree murder. Remember how he joked about how he was going to get 15 years in prison? Well, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, which is fitting because imagine the relief that the community felt when they heard his sentencing, because who is to say that he's not going to commit the same sort of crimes once he gets out if he does, if he was given the possibility of parole. Brian Cohee's assumption that Bond's death would go unnoticed was incorrect because the latter had many friends who adored him and respected him. Furthermore, they installed a memorial sculpture in his memory in the location he used to spend most of his time. Barnes' sister, Geraldine Shipp, stated, "He was a man who was loved by the community and family. Nothing can replace Warren, but hopefully Brian Cohee can never, ever have a chance to hurt someone else again." People who love Warren Barnes lovingly called him the reading man because he was an avid reader. Furthermore, they described him as a kind and hardworking person. And that is the case of Brian Cohee Jr. and the unjust murder of Warren Barnes. What do you guys think? Leave your thoughts in the comments, stay safe out there, and we'll see you in the next episode. If you've got any case suggestions, let us know in the comments or the Q&A area in Spotify. Don't forget to support this podcast by following us on Spotify or wherever you're listening to and rating our show. Thank you for listening. I'm Kay, and this was Rotten Minds.